Numbers Untold. When trophies became numbers, a brutal history of scalping and counting. History is often told through grand narratives of empires and heroes. But sometimes, to truly understand humanity, we must delve into its darkest practices. Today, we confront a brutal truth: the act of scalping, a practice most commonly associated with indigenous peoples of North America. But the story, as with all human practices, is far more complex, far older, and deeply intertwined with a concept that predates nations and empires. Counting. Why did some indigenous groups scalp their enemies? And how did this horrific act become tangled with the very human need to quantify, to record, to number? Beyond North America, did this practice exist elsewhere? And if so, what drove it? This is a journey into the grim intersection of warfare, culture, and the primal impulse to count. To understand scalping, we must first understand the concept of a trophy. Across human history, warriors have taken tokens from their defeated foes. From ancient Greece, where Achilles stripped Hector of his armor, to medieval Europe, where knights displayed enemy banners, the trophy served multiple purposes: proof of victory, an insult to the defeated, a boost to the victor's prestige. For some indigenous groups in North America, the scalp was one such trophy. But it was more than just a souvenir. It was often seen as carrying the essence, the power, or even the soul of the fallen enemy. Taking a scalp could symbolize the complete subjugation of a foe, preventing them from entering the afterlife or diminishing their strength in the spirit world. Here's where numbers enter this grim equation. For many tribes, particularly in the plains and eastern woodlands, a warrior's status was directly tied to their achievements in battle. Their counts. How many enemies had they touched? How many horses had they captured? And, for some, how many scalps had they taken? Scalps became a quantifiable metric of prowess. A warrior might wear a specific number of feathers, each representing a scalp. Songs would recount a warrior's tally. The scalp was a brutal, undeniable number in the ledger of their valor, a visual representation of their contribution to the tribe's defense or dominance. The practice of scalping was not invented by Europeans or in response to them. Archaeological evidence confirms its presence in North America prior to European arrival. For example, sites like Crow Creek in South Dakota, dating back to the 14th century, show evidence of mass scalping among warring tribes. The motivations were complex and varied. Revenge, a brutal cycle of retribution between rival tribes. Terror, to instill fear in enemies and discourage attacks. Spiritual power, to capture the power of the enemy. Ceremonial purposes, scalps were sometimes used in rituals or victory dances, contributing to the community's spiritual well-being or celebrating a successful campaign. Crucially, it was not a universal practice among all indigenous groups. And even among those who practiced it, the specific rituals and meanings differed significantly. It was a practice born from intense intertribal warfare, a harsh reality long before the arrival of white settlers. The arrival of Europeans, however, drastically altered and escalated the practice of scalping. This is where the grim count of scalps transformed from a tribal metric of honor into a mercenary system. The British, French, and later the American colonists engaged in brutal colonial wars, often pitting indigenous tribes against each other. To incentivize allies and terrorize enemies, colonial governments began offering bounties for scalps. 17th century, during King Philip's War, 1675 to 1678, the Massachusetts Bay Colony offered a bounty for Native American scalps. 18th century, during the French and Indian War, both the British and French offered rewards for enemy scalps. The British, for instance, offered significant sums for the scalps of French soldiers and allied indigenous warriors. American Revolution and beyond, the practice continued. George Washington, in 1779, instructed Major General John Sullivan to wage war against the Iroquois, stating that total ruin of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible is essential. While not directly ordering scalping, the context of total war and previous bounty systems created an environment where such acts were common. Later, settlers moving west continued this practice against indigenous peoples, often with government encouragement. This system introduced a cold, quantifiable, and monetary value to scalps. It turned a cultural trophy into a commodity. A precise number of scalps, directly correlated to a precise number of shillings or pounds. This incentivized indiscriminate killing, including women and children, as a scalp was a scalp, regardless of who it came from, as long as it proved a kill. This external economic incentive drastically amplified the practice and its brutality. Was scalping unique to North America? The answer is no. While less documented in its specifics, similar practices existed across various cultures. Ancient Scythians Eurasia Herodotus, the Greek historian, described Scythian warriors, nomadic tribes from the steppes of Eurasia, scalping their enemies. They would even use the scalps as napkins or to adorn their quivers. This was also a clear form of war trophy, demonstrating prowess and intimidating foes. Pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, while not exactly scalping in the North American sense, some Mesoamerican cultures practiced decapitation and the taking of human heads as trophies, particularly the Aztecs. These were often displayed in skull racks sumpently, serving as a powerful visual tally of sacrificial victims and military victories. The counting of these heads was a significant public display of power. Early modern Europe, though not as widespread or ritualized as in some indigenous cultures, isolated instances of taking body parts, ears, noses as trophies from enemies in Europe during periods of intense warfare are documented, especially among mercenaries or in brutal peasant uprisings. The purpose was similar: proof of kill, intimidation, and a personal tally of bravery. The common thread here is the human desire for a quantifiable measure of victory and the demonstration of dominance, whether it's the number of scalps, heads, or captured banners. The act of counting human losses of the enemy and gains of the victor is a deeply ingrained, albeit dark, aspect of human conflict. The history of scalping is a testament to how the primal need to count, to quantify, can be interwoven with acts of extreme violence. For indigenous warriors, it could be a metric of honor and spiritual power within a complex cultural system. For European colonists, it became a transactional number, a bounty on a head that fueled genocidal policies. The numbers involved in this history are staggering and heartbreaking. Thousands upon thousands of lives, reduced to a tally, a bounty, a gruesome statistic. The practice, intensified by colonial wars and the relentless push of westward expansion, became a symbol of the brutal conflicts that shaped the North American continent. Ultimately, the act of scalping, whether culturally symbolic or economically incentivized, highlights a universal truth in warfare. Humans often seek to reduce the enemy to a number, a body count, a tally of victories. This dehumanization, this transformation into a quantifiable object, often paves the way for the most heinous acts of brutality. The Numbers Untold in this episode are not abstract equations. They are the grim counts of a dark past, echoing a time when the very act of counting became a tool, not just for survival or organization, but for conquest and terror. The story of scalping is not just a footnote in history. It's a stark reminder of the complexities of human nature. It shows us how cultural practices, intensified by external pressures, and the cold logic of monetary bounties, can escalate into horrifying acts. And how, even in the most barbaric of practices, the human impulse to count, to quantify, to record, leaves its indelible mark. The numbers of scalps, a tragic tally of lives, speak volumes about the brutal encounters of past centuries, a grim whisper of history. Welcome to the history of numbers. Sometimes, they tell a very painful story.